Thanks for tuning in to more NFL Draft Talk on the Ourlads Football Network as we go inside the depth charts of the NFL. And on this show, it's the Buffalo Bills with Ryan Talbot. He covers the Bills for NewYorkUpstate.com, NYUP.com. You can check him out as well. And Ryan, good to have you on again talking Buffalo Bills football with us.
Yeah, thanks for having me on again. Looking forward to it.
Yeah, we were going to have you on last week, but it came right about the time that the mini camps were going on. So we've decided to push it back to this week and kind of talk about maybe some of the news headlines, if there were any. I guess there always are. That's how busy you are, I'm sure, covering this team. So what were the headlines if you had to pick one from last week?
Ooh, that's a great one. You know what? I'll go with an underrated storyline, I guess, and that would be the last pick that the Bills made in the draft. That's Jack Anderson out of Texas Tech.
Okay.
They had him working at center. So I think that the Bills probably realized that at this point in time, those 6th, 7th round picks, it's going to be hard for them to make this roster, but the more versatility you have, the better your odds are of making it. And when you look in Buffalo specifically, you have Mitch Morse, who's had the concussion history. And in 2 seasons with the Bills especially, he's had issues where his first year he missed all of the OTAs and training camp, some of the preseason as well. Second year, he missed some time in the regular season. So the Bills might be thinking long-term with Jack Anderson, being someone that could be in play to be that long-term center, depending on how that development comes along.
Yeah, matter of fact, I actually had some notes here that I was going to bring up because right out of the draft profile of Ourlads, which is, of course, right here, you can order it at Ourlads.com. This is still a great time to get the draft guide because if you're a Bills fan, there's tons of profiles for the players. Matter of fact, I think, let's see, there's 5, 6, 7, 8. There's 11 draft profiles of either players that were drafted or signed after the draft. You can find in this draft guide. So here it is with Jack Anderson. I'll just read a little bit here. Doesn't have an overly impressive toolbox when it comes to size and athletic ability, but he's a natural competitor with a nasty punch. May need to make a move to center. And also talked about the fact that he has short arms. And obviously, when you have short arms, they want to kind of squeeze you into the offensive line as much as possible. But like you also said, it's great to have a player that would have that kind of versatility because he started 38 games at right guard.
Yeah, and the Bills value versatility. You look at that offensive line, they have John Feliciano, who, if Mitch Morse goes down, he plays center. They have Ryan Bates as a depth guy who is a center tackle mix. And that's a little bit rare. You have some guys that can flip to either side. So they love versatility. That helps Jack Anderson. But obviously, the Bills also added 2 mammoth tackles in this draft class as well. So they're certainly thinking not just short-term, but long-term on that offensive line as well.
All right. Before we kind of break down the draft, I want to talk about some of the things that we went over before the draft. And because we were trying to figure out, as always, okay, what do you think the Bills, what do you think they're going to do targeting as far as the rest of free agency? Because at the time, Matt Milano was still out there. So was Darrell Williams and Andre Roberts and J.J. Watt. There was some talk about the team getting J.J. Watt at the time. But you did not believe that Milano was going to return. So how surprised were you that he did? And what was the outcome of that re-signing?
Yeah, I was very surprised. Brandon Beane is very careful with his words. And when you hear him say that a certain player has earned the right to test free agency in the past, it's kind of meant they're a little priced out of our range. And the Bills were kind of pinched financially going into this year. At least it looked like on paper, where you were expecting Milano to set the market at linebacker. To a lot of projections were talking anywhere in that $12 to $14 million range, which was out of Buffalo's range when you think about the fact that they had Tremaine Edmonds coming up, to the fact they have Josh Allen especially coming up. So when they signed Matt Milano, and I think it was more team friendly. It's around that 11 million mark, which is still good money for a linebacker, but a little bit lower than some of the estimates had him earning. That was a surprise. So then you kind of said, okay, well, Matt Milano's back. That means the Bills are going to let Darrell Williams go. And then the next day, Darrell Williams resigns. So you're like, okay, well, John Feliciano's the odd man out. Nope, he comes back too. So before free agency even begins, they re-sign all three of their key free agents. Now, you mentioned J.J. Watt. Had Watt have selected or chosen Buffalo, it's really interesting to think how many of those three would have been able to return, because Watt would have cost quite a bit of money. So maybe none of the three, maybe only one of those three comes back in that scenario. So could be a blessing in disguise. But then again, if J.J. Watt has an outstanding season in Arizona, you could be sitting here saying, what if as well?
Sure. What about the only guy, actually, another guy that did not make it back was Roberts. So is there a front runner for that job right now? Could it be Stevenson?
Stevenson is in play. Isaiah McKenzie's in play as well. You know, McKenzie had a punt return in week 17 against Miami that went for a touchdown. So very small sample size, but he looked good there. Obviously, that was his path into the NFL with Denver when he was first drafted there. He had some fumbling issues, which is what caused Denver to part ways with him before the Bills claimed him on waivers. So it could be something where the Bills really do want to make sure that the fumbling issues are something of the past. But yeah, Stevenson is certainly in play. More of that straight line speed, maybe doesn't have the make you miss maneuverability that Isaiah McKenzie has, but speed is speed. Yeah. So he's certainly in play, and that's definitely his avenue and path to making this roster.
All right. Before we talk more about Stevenson and the rest of the guys, let's talk about some of the positions too, because we talked about tight end. The only tight end that was added really is Quentin Morris. So we'll talk about him a little bit later on. But yeah, were you surprised he did not add someone else into that tight end room, or was it just a numbers game financially?
I think it was just kind of tough for them. You know, in free agency, they did sign Jacob Hollister, who played with Josh Allen at Wyoming. They still have Dawson Knox. You have Tommy Sweeney that's coming back. He had COVID last year, and then there was heart issues, so that sidelined him for the entire year.
Okay.
But the word is that he'll be back. They trade away Lee Smith, so I heard that the Bills really like Pat Freiermuth, but he was taken before the Bills had a chance to get him in round 2. So maybe if he had been on the board there, he could have been in play for Buffalo. But I just think that after that, I don't want to say the talent level dropped significantly, but I think the value versus the need just never met up for Buffalo in the draft. And obviously they were never going to get Kyle Pitts, who was number 4 off the board. So this draft class was pretty thin. I think that they're fine rolling in with Hollister and Knox as their top 2, seeing what they have in the undrafted free agent, seeing what they have in Tommy Sweeney, who they did like as a rookie, but he's had some injuries. He had a foot injury even before the COVID issue happened this past season. So you got to see what you still have in him as well.
And you bring up a good point with Hollister, because I remember that those two guys connecting quite a bit at Wyoming, because he was like his favorite target. And that's actually how I caught my eye to Hollister, because I even, when he was a free agent with the Patriots, I remember saying, I think this guy's got a shot. I was surprised with how much the Patriots love their tight ends that he didn't make it there. But then he went to Seattle, and he actually played pretty decently and got some production for a tight end that wasn't drafted or anything like that. So yeah, with the connection, that's going to be interesting to keep an eye on that. No running back. So it's Singletary and Moss again.
Yeah, it's Singletary, it's Moss, it's Antonio Williams, who ran all over the Dolphins in week 17, undrafted free agent. That kind of, his skill set really does fit the blocking scheme here in terms of the, what he does well. So could be in play. The fans love Christian Wade. I'm not sure Christian Wade will ever be in play here. He's 30 years old now at this point, international pathway player. But a few preseasons ago, first touch, he takes it for a touchdown. Second touch, he almost takes for a receiving touchdown. I think he gets tackled around the 1 or the 2 yard line. So an explosive player, not a lot of tread taken off the tires, so to speak, because he was a rugby guy before coming to the NFL. So, those guys are in play. They did add Matt Breida in free agency, who Breida's a mystery because of what happened last year in Miami. I thought that that running back room, he would have had more opportunities to play, and for whatever reason, he didn't. Really good yard per carry average during his time in San Francisco. So who knows what you have there. So it's definitely going to be a running back by committee. It's just going to be interesting to see how it all shakes out.
If Etienne would have been available, would that have been like a slam dunk that because a lot of people had him going to Buffalo if he was still available. Do you think that would have been 50-50 or more than 50-50?
I would say 50-50. They really did like Greg Rousseau, especially after, hearing about everything. And we can get more into that when we talk about Rousseau, but they really did like him, and they did a lot of homework on him.
Okay. And then finally, cornerback. We talked about the possibility of them finding a number 2, or a number 2 of the future. That hasn't happened yet. 6th round. So again, we'll talk about Wild Goose a little bit later on. But is that one of the issues you think that this team might encounter this season?
Yeah, I do. I think that, on paper, that's probably their biggest issue. Now, that said, they're in on Steven Nelson, free agent, most recently with Pittsburgh, but a lot of teams are in on him in terms of showing interest. So, Bills are not a lock to even necessarily get him in the building. It's going to probably come down to money, and we'll see what they do there, how much confidence they have in him in terms of what they could offer. But yeah, they're rolling with Levi Wallace, who they brought in again at a very low rate, very low price. They did not tender him, but Levi Wallace wanted to return. Dane Jackson's back in the mix, rookie last year, 7th round pick. Played really well when given the opportunities. Interception against the Jets, pass defense and one-on-one against DeAndre Hopkins. He comes in due to an injury in the Seattle game. In the first play, they target him with DK Metcalf. It was a little quick screen pass out to Metcalf. As soon as Metcalf caught the ball, he tackled him. So no gain on the play. So they liked the instincts. They liked what they saw out of him. He is limited athletically. But Brendan Beane was kind of raving about him being one of those, a gamer, so to speak, where, he doesn't test off the charts, but when he's actually in there, he does things well. So he's going to have an opportunity. But I still think that whether it's a veteran that's on the market now or someone that gets let go closer to cut downs, they're going to bring in a veteran to throw into that mix because it's just something that this regime has done. Okay. But yeah, fans were really clamoring for a cornerback on day 2 of the draft, early day 3, and it just never happened until obviously late on day 3.
Sure. And look, Nelson might be one of the positions that happens every season or every year, which is I've got all this interest. I'm going to wait to the last possible minute, and I'll skip as many practices and time in camp, and then he's going to probably be one of these late, 1 week to go before the season begins, guys. It's very possible that's going to be the case.
Yeah, and more power to the players if they don't want to go to these mini camps and OTAs. If he wants to wait until training camp or the preseason, so be it. Now, the longer he waits, the less likely it is that he's on the field week 1 with at least a team like Buffalo, because they want to make sure that these players are comfortable. They know that Levi Wallace knows the system. They've seen enough out of Dane Jackson last year to know that he knows the system. So, I think missing some of these mini camps, that's fine. But I think a decision would have to come, at least in the case of Buffalo, sooner rather than later, if that's the decision he wants to make.
Okay, let's start now breaking down the draft. And the first 2 picks, interesting, as far as the grading system at Ourlads, there was a very small difference between Rousseau, who was the first pick for the Bills, and Basham, who went number 2. If you look at the system, just give you a reference, Rousseau had a rating of 8.99. Basham had a rating of 8.89. That's how close they were. It was basically Rousseau, and the next guy was Basham. So that's a good thing if you're thinking about, especially from Basham's point of view. But it's interesting that I looked, and when you break down both guys, they both have the ability to line up anywhere, outside, inside. And the other thing we talked about was finding, and I know these are not those players that we were talking about at the time when you were mentioning looking for a true number, a true one technique. That's not what we're talking about here, but it is adding 2 guys that can play inside as well as outside, and obviously they've got production. Rousseau's 1 year, Basham's 4 years, so it's completely different. You got a guy that has all the experience in the world, and one guy that some people might consider a 1 year wonder, a boomer bust. So I think it's kind of interesting, but I think it's a really good situation for the Bills that they were able to get them both.
Yeah, and leading up to the draft, my final mock draft, I had it down to Rousseau and Joe Tryon for my last mock draft in the
Okay.
first round, and I kind of said, all things considered, production favored Rousseau at college, and that their final seasons they both opted out last year. But then athletically, in terms of how they tested at the pro days, Tryon tested better. So I'm like, okay, well, maybe if they're looking for more of an athletic guy, so on and so forth. Well, it ends up being Rousseau. Now, the one thing I didn't really consider, and I really should have, is the fact that there's this inner circle of coaches that Sean McDermott is close with due to a connection that he has, I believe it was at Penn State coach on the coaching staff. And one of his closest allies in the coaching system is Manny Diaz, who obviously is at the U. So he could have talked to him, done a lot of due diligence there. And kudos to Cover One. They're a site that covers the Bills that kind of talked about these relationships that Sean McDermott has with different coaches in college and in the pros and things like that. And that pointed that out a few years ago. So he has a relationship there. Dan Morgan, who is now gone, he's the assistant GM now with the Panthers, but he was with the Bills during this whole draft process. Obviously, went to Miami. He has a lot of relationships there. So I'm sure that they did that extra due diligence with those relationships to say, what is he like on the field? What's he like off the field? What was he like last year when he opted out? Because they said that Rousseau was still going to the meetings, attending them virtually, was there for his teammates. And I think that goes a long way with the Bills in terms of what kind of player he is and person he is. So that makes sense. And, as you were saying, Rousseau and Basham, they were very similar grade-wise because there were some mock drafts leading up to the draft where Basham was a first-round pick, Rousseau wasn't, vice versa. And the Bills actually had a trade-down option in round 2, and they pretty much said it's a done deal as long as this one player is not on the board. And that one player was Boogie Basham. So when Basham was on the board, the Bills called whatever team that was and said, hey, listen, our player's here. We're taking him. So that was their guy in round 2 where they said, even though we already drafted a defensive end, we're going to go back to that because we want that versatility. Yeah. We want options because long-term, too, Jerry Hughes, over 30 years old, Mario Addison, over 30 years old, both entering the final year of their contracts. One of them, I'm not sure one will get cut or not, but one of them could even get cut leading up to the season just because you already have AJ Epineza. You signed F.A. Obata. I think F.A. Obata is more of the odd man out, even though you signed him in free agency with these more the veteran players. So you have options here, but you want to get Rousseau some experience. You don't want him getting a redshirt season. You want to get him some snaps. You want to get Carlos Basham some snaps. And then on obvious passing situations, like you said, you can kick one of them on the inside, put him next to Ed Oliver. Then you have Hughes and Addison. And if you know it's a passing down, then those are 4 good pass rushers that you're going to have going after the quarterback, at least rushing the ball out of their hands. So it gives the Bills a little bit more versatility. I still think that Rousseau could add some weight onto his frame. There were some people talking about that 285, 290 range. I don't know if I would want him to get that big. He was about 266 at his pro day. I'd say 275, maybe 280 absolutely. Cap it.
Sure.
But let him grow into that frame naturally. Don't just have him pack on the pounds. But I think there's a lot of things that you could do with him that excites the Bills.
And what's also interesting about Basham is he a lot of scouts believe that his ability against the run is almost as equal as his ability as far as pass rusher, an edge rusher, and that's very important.
Very important. Very similar. I don't want to say that they're similar in terms of their skill sets, but just like when Shaq Lawson came out years ago, they said, maybe as a pass rusher, he wasn't there quite yet, but he was solid as a run defender. And he got better every year as a getting after the quarterback in Buffalo, but he was always solid against the run. So, if Basham can be good against the run, that's going to help him get on the field on those early downs because obviously that's when teams run more often than not, and he can still get after the quarterback there. So absolutely agree there. Basham is going to be someone that I think could have more of an impact actually out of the gate maybe than Rousseau, but I think as the season progresses, you're going to see more and more of Rousseau.
And it was no surprise too that they did go, even though again you're going back to back with edge rushers, but you're going up front on defense. And we talked about, and it was just obvious that the Bills' defense just fell off last year. And then you mentioned some of the older players, especially up front. It's good to know now, if you're a Bills fan, that not only have you drafted these two guys, but you, as you mentioned, they also, of course, took Epinesa with their top pick last year. So, and
Yeah.
Oliver the year before that.
Yep, a lot of youth now up front. Obviously, you still have the two veterans that I mentioned on the outside. You still have Star Lotulelei on the inside. They never really did necessarily address an heir apparent in the draft. But maybe that speaks to what they think of Harrison Phillips coming off of a serious injury. There was times even before not in 2020, 2019, where it looked like Phillips was going to maybe get a little bit more play than Star Lotulelei, but then he had that serious injury and he was out for that year. So maybe that speaks to his ability. Maybe the Bills are still looking to see what's out there. Who knows? But at least they've added some youth into that mix up front, and that is key. That's really important long term.
The next two picks, the Bills went with 6'8" offensive linemen. Wow. Now, Spencer Brown. There's two guys in this draft class for the Bills that I like the most. And I'm never going to always take the top guy. Anybody can do that. But this is one of them. And that's Spencer Brown. Now, he had a second-round grade from Ourlads. And why not? Even though he had his season canceled, that was a big deal coming from Northern Iowa down there in the FCS. But you're talking about a guy with just the elite combination of height, weight, length, athletic ability. He's got a tremendous upside. And it doesn't always mean that it's all going to work out. But when you can get a guy like that in round 3, you just go with it every day. Throw in the fact that he's a tough and nasty guy too. You always want to see that from an offensive lineman. And then Doyle was a 2-year starter at left tackle. Well, the last 2 years at left tackle, earning first-team MAC honors. So you're talking about a guy that was a 4-year starter, that was at the highest level in the conference. And we know the MAC is the MAC, but hey, you want your guy to be the highest in a conference like that, and he surely is. Probably more of a swing tackle earlier in his career, but someone who definitely in the next couple of years could be the starting right tackle for the Bills.
Yeah, and one of the funny stories that came out of Bill's rookie minicamp is the fact that both of those linemen, and I want to say Jack Anderson was the third one, they were all on the same flight together coming to Buffalo, and the flight attendant had to rearrange the passengers on the seat because you can't have 900 pounds of humanity in one section of that airplane.
Yeah, right.
So they were talking about that. Yeah, so the Bills went with some really big boys, starting with Spencer Brown, and Spencer, actually both Brown and Doyle tested off the charts athletically. Relative athletic score is something that's out there, one of those varying degrees to check someone's athleticism. With Brown, he graded at a 10.0. It's the highest you can get, highest mark. And then Doyle, 9.9. So the Bills are drafting these dancing bears, 6'8", 308, 315, somewhere in that range. Just huge men that can move really well. And like you said, they had some higher draft grades than where they were selected. You said Ourlads had a second round on Brown. To get him at the end of round 3, pick 93, that's great value. And he most likely out of the gates, in my opinion, will be the swing tackle for the Bills because you have Darrell Williams, you have Deion Dawkins. They're set minus any kind of injury coming up. But going into the draft, you had Bobby Hart penciled in as that swing tackle, and maybe Bobby Hart still wins that job. Hart has a ton of starting experience in the NFL, but it's been underwhelming starting experience with the Bengals. So it gives a guy like Brown a chance. And the other thing that I really liked about him is he had offers from the Big Ten and the Big 12 this past season to play with their teams. He didn't want to leave his Northern Iowa teammates. He felt like that would have been a slap in the face to the people that recruited him, where those Big 10 and Big 12 teams, they weren't after him when he first came out. And then second, so what did he do? Because he knew he couldn't play, he goes and he starts working with Joe Staley. Joe Staley had one heck of a career in the NFL with the 49ers. And mind you, it was at guard, but he trained with him for months on end. Staley raved about him as a player leading up to the draft, talking about how great he was at the Senior Bowl. And if the Bills can, get anything out of that relationship, that Staley relationship, training him in the offseason, kind of like what the Bills ended up getting with Josh Allen and Palmer working with him in the off seasons, that can accelerate the developmental process because some of the players like to go to their own guys in the offseason. There's nothing wrong with that. And to have an all-pro like Joe Staley mentoring a Spencer Brown, even though it's a different position, mind you, that can still pay huge dividends for the Bills in terms of cutting that gap down. And maybe Darrell Williams, that 3-year contract ends up being a 2-year deal or a 1-year, because Brandon Beane always builds outs into it. Now, should the Bills be looking to get out of that contract? Not right now, because Darrell Williams was outstanding last year. As long as he plays at that level and maintains that level, let him play out the 3 years. But then you do have Brown waiting in the wings, and you have Tommy Doyle waiting in the wings. And if there's an injury, one or both could step into that lineup sooner rather than later. Doyle, just like you said, outstanding athletically, big guy size-wise. Bobby Johnson is going to really enjoy working with all 3 of the offensive linemen that were drafted this year.
Yeah, because the other guy, which you talked about earlier, was Jack Anderson. And again, so 38 starts at right guard for Texas Tech, another 4-year starter, like Doyle. He was a one-time freshman All-American and first-team Big 12 the past year. So another player who, as we just talked about, will hopefully give them versatility, and who knows, could be the starting center of the future. And that's the thing. You guards and centers, you have a much better chance of finding these guys later in the draft, 6th, 7th round, undrafted. Happens all the time.
Mm-hmm. And the Bills have done this, Brandon Beane specifically, since he's come in. And he's just always had a surplus of offensive linemen, because then at the closer to cutdown days, there's some guys you can trade. Wyatt Teller, who has been outstanding for Cleveland. Maybe that's a trade the Bills would like back, although one of those picks went in the Stephon Diggs trade. There was Russell Bodine, who they traded to the Patriots, who did not pan out in New England, but the Bills still ended up getting that pick. So it never hurts to have a surplus of offensive linemen, because maybe a Jack Anderson does impress. And then there is someone an Ike Butker, who they did tender and they're bringing back. I still think he's too valuable to trade, but maybe he's someone that gets traded. The Bills are never in the position, at least in the last few years, to get those compensatory picks. But this is kind of how Brandon Beane gets those extra picks, as he trades away those extra offensive linemen that he has, because that's one position that teams are always looking for.
Absolutely. All right. Wide receiver, kick returner. We talked about Stevenson. They got him in the 6th round. Extremely productive, a first-team All-AAC in 2018, 2019, 27 touchdowns in his last 30 games combined from rush, receiving, returning. Matter of fact, had 3 kick return touchdowns over his last 13 games. There are some concerns about durability and effort. He's got a slight frame, but these are all the reasons why he lasted into the 6th round. So you just never know with guys like this. And there's an opening. There's a competition definitely there for him to take the kick returner job if he can go after it and go get it.
Yeah, and that's what the Bills did last year. Andre Roberts was outstanding as their return man, but he was pretty much just essentially a return man. He saw very few snaps at wide receiver. So when they carried the 7 wide receivers, it was really 6 wide receivers and Andre Roberts. So it could be that they carry 6 core wide receivers this year, and then Stevenson as number 7, that return man, that versatility. Now, Isaiah McKenzie's on this roster. McKenzie has that return ability. He's also that gadget guy, that speed guy. But Stevenson is more that straight line speed. So if the Bills want to kind of run him out there, just go out there and run a go route, because we have Stephon Diggs, we have Gabe Davis, we have Emmanuel Sanders, we have Cole Beasley. There's already enough defenders that have to really focus in on those 4 guys. If we want to run a 5 wide receiver empty set, just run straight. Just, go and see what happens. They don't have to use him a lot, but, that's beneficial. So I did like that pick. Chris Trapasso, CBS Sports, a friend of the NY Up. He actually had a 3rd round. He had him in the 3rd round in a few of his mock drafts to the Bills, actually. Kind of said he was his favorite small speed guy in this draft class. So, I don't know if he'll have that kind of value out of the gate, but the Bills are loaded at receiver. Yeah. He could be that sneaky addition that you can just kind of sneak onto the field. And, do you really put one of your better corners on him and then leave a Diggs open or leave an Emmanuel Sanders? Those are the problems that opposing defensive coordinators are going to have to deal with this season.
I'm looking at the receiving unit now, and it's amazing in just a couple of years, the work that was done. Because a couple of years ago, as you remember, it was just barren.
Yeah, it was Kelvin Benjamin, it was Zay Jones, it was Andre Holmes.
Okay, yes.
So
yes.
yeah, So, I mean, those were
Hey, there
three
was
of
the
your better
Kamondre
guys.
Holmes develop into
Yeah.
really number one receiver. That's the kind of hope that Bills fans. That's where they were.
Yeah, and to go from that to Stephon Diggs, Cole Beasley, Emmanuel Sanders, and obviously no longer with the team, but even John Brown played a role in that ascension to where they were to where they are now, and it's just night and day.
And that's why it's even going to take just to throw in Trey Walker, who was not in the profile section of Ourlads, but I just knew I had seen enough of him in the games for because San Jose State was like one of my favorite teams this past year. I loved handicapping their games because they were getting no respect all season long, from the very first big game win against San Diego State all the way to beating Boise State in the Mountain West Conference Championship game for the first ever championship. It's just a tremendous story. And Walker, by the way, in that championship game, had 7 receptions, 137 yards, and a touchdown. He was clearly their top threat on offense over the last few years. He had a huge 2019. And to get him as an undrafted free agent is nice, and is someone that maybe a couple of years from now might be able to make it on the team. And it's just, again, it's just amazing now how you get a guy like that is gonna have a hard time finding a way to get on the football field with the depth of this receiving unit.
Yeah, and I don't know what the Bills told him in terms of, how they sold him on coming to Buffalo, but realistically, they're probably hoping that if he does perform well at training camp in the preseason, you stash him on the practice squad this year. And then after the end of this season, you have Emmanuel Sanders coming off the books. You have Isaiah McKenzie coming off the books. I highly doubt Cole Beasley comes off the books, but there's an out in his contract. So there's at least 2 guys, though, that are coming off the board, and you can say, listen, if you do well this year and you really pick up the system, year 2, there's a path for you to at least compete for a roster spot here. So I'm not sure if that was their sales pitch, but whatever
Sounds
they
good to
said
me.
worked. Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
By the way, is that the Gentry that played at Wyoming?
Yes, yeah. So they have Josh Allen's top 2 targets at Wyoming are on this roster. Tanner Gentry signed late last season to a futures contract, so he was excited to come back and try to get that opportunity here to reignite that relationship with Allen in terms of that chemistry on the field.
Good luck on that, with that unit. By the way, Jay Kumaro, boy, did his name pop out in the headlines over the last, starting with last year. But I know things haven't worked out with him in Buffalo, but I don't know. That was just one of those strange situations with Aaron Rodgers.
Yeah, right when they picked him up originally last year, I did a 5 things to know about him article, and one of the things I used was that quote from Aaron Rodgers the day before he was cut. Rodgers is on Sirius XM talking about how he pretty much envisioned Kumaro as their wide receiver 4. He's reliable, he's great, good in the locker room, good on the field, and then he's cut. And listen, I get it. The NFL, it's tough to make the numbers work, but when your star quarterback is raving about this guy, you need to find a way to make it. And this is also a wide receiver that plays special teams. When the Bills cut him last year at the end of the season, it was after he had a touchdown against Denver in the regular season. It's because John Brown was back, and it was strictly a numbers game.
Okay.
They intended to sign him back to their practice squad, but the Saints claimed him.
Okay.
So then he's on the Saints roster. The Saints get eliminated from the playoffs. They cut ties with them. The Bills plan to re-sign him to their rosters. If they get to the Super Bowl, he would have been eligible to play in the game. Okay. Now, they lose in the championship, so the next day he signed to a future reserve deal. So they really do like Kumaro, but again, it's a numbers game here in Buffalo. Yeah. Can he make it? Who knows? I mean, it's going to be tough.
A lot of football GMs that need wide receivers are gonna have their eyes on final cuts for the Buffalo Bills, and maybe there's a trade. You just talked about trades with the other positions. Who knows? I mean, I guess it would have to be. I don't know. Would it be Sanders though, or it could be McKenzie, right?
McKenzie could be in play. He did say he turned down some offers from some other teams, and maybe at the end of the day, there's always maybe a Kumaro is traded because of the special teams ability. The fact that he has produced to a lower extent or a little extent. I'm not saying you're going to get
No,
anything great from a conditional pick if he
sure.
makes the other team's roster, but something like that I could absolutely see happening.
The Packers might want to trade for him
Yeah,
now.
yeah, make Aaron
Get him.
happy.
Yeah, they can use all the goodwill with him. And then finally, I'll go into the undrafted guys since we're on receivers and just bring up Quentin Morris because I was watching him in the Senior Bowl. I was going, wow. I mean, this guy's making some really good catches. And you looked at his profile and you saw that he was number 2 behind Scotty Miller, the Buck Scotty Miller, back several years ago. Then the last 2 years, he's the number 1 receiver for Bowling Green. Now, they are a terrible college football team, maybe the worst college football team the last 2 years. But he's still a tight end, being their number 1 receiver. He's not a blocker, but he is a receiver. And on this team, I mean, why not? Why not? More than likely practice squad early, but why not? I mean, it'll be interesting to see whether or not he can have a really good training camp in a preseason.
Yeah, and that's just it. I thought he was better than some of the tight ends that were drafted late. There was a few where I said, okay, I think this player is going to be better for the Bills, and it's for the fact that they were able to get him, Quentin Morris, as an undrafted free agent. It's just huge. But again, the path of 53-man roster, probably not there. It depends on what happens with Tommy Sweeney. And he had a heart condition after he had COVID last year, but he's supposed to be cleared to go. They obviously still have high hopes for Dawson Knox. They like Jacob Hollister. Nate Becker's been on the practice squad for a few years here. So there's a path. And if an injury happens, maybe he is the guy that ends up making it. You just never know. There's always that surprise. Reggie Gilliam is kind of a fullback tight end hybrid. He's a special team standout. So I think, he's going to be in the mix there as well.
All right, and then the final 4 players are all DBs. The 2 6th-rounders, Hamlin and Wild Goose, and the 2 undrafted kids, Thompson from San Diego State and Griffin from USC. And Hamlin was my other player that I circled, besides Spencer Brown. And I just like Hamlin. The fact that the Bills were able to get him in the 6th round, I was shocked. He's 4th-round grade, 3-year starter, more of a box safety type, but a very good tackler. And I wonder, I know we talked about the Bills also before the draft looking for another, maybe a hybrid type guy, somebody that could be in that box area, somebody that can maybe, and again, before Milano was re-signed, it was about looking for a guy that could also cover tight ends and things of that nature. But,
right.
But they add Hamlin and Thompson. And I think Thompson's a guy that might have just as good as an opportunity to be more of a hybrid type player on the Bills. But I think the fact that the Bills were able to get Thompson, who was a 6th-round grade, and by the way, Morris had a 6th-round grade and Griffin had a 6th-round grade. So the Bills signed 3 guys that all had 6th-round grades. And I'm just it's important to note that because that means these guys have a serious chance to make the team. But Hamlin's at the top of my list, obviously, and that's why he was the top of the 4 guys selected.
Yeah, and Hamlin's a good story because his best friend Dane Jackson is on this team. And it wasn't just like Pitt; they literally grew up together, about a block away from one another, I believe, is what I was told. And high school, college, now they're on the same NFL team. So if there's anyone that can get him up to speed on the playbook immediately, it's Dane Jackson. I think the Bills really have a strong conviction in their secondary coaches that they can develop these players quickly. You look at a Levi Wallace, who is an undrafted free agent, and the fact how nicely along he's come. You look at a Dane Jackson, who thrived last year given the opportunities. You have 2 veterans in the secondary at safety, and Micah Hyde and Jordan Poyer. So that's going to help too. So they really like these later round or undrafted free agent players that I think they feel like they can develop. And you mentioned it. Some guys that had draftable grades. Griffin, I guess, didn't test well is what the story was with him, but I think that he was a quality player at USC. Obviously, the whole story with the Bills Mafia was the fact that, hey, that's Warren G's son. They love that fact, but playing wise, there's a path for him to eventually get some time on this roster if he performs well. Same with Wild Goose, obviously, who they drafted. Another player who The Bills like guys who tackle well. They like guys who are smart players. Both of those fit the mold. But Wild Goose is actually really
Yep.
athletic too. He tested really well athletically, and that's kind of where Jackson and Levi Wallace fell by the wayside a little bit. So you actually have someone that has that speed, that extra gear that maybe they are missing. So if you can develop him and bring him along, he could be that number two cornerback of the future opposite Trey
Yeah, I
White.
mean, I think Hamlin, of course, Wild Goose too, because they were drafted. But I think Thompson has a chance to make the team. I really do. You're talking about also not only was a 4-year starter, and he's probably going to make his way on special teams too, because of his everything says special teams in the NFL for Thompson's abilities. But you were talking about one of the better defensive programs in college football for the time that he started there for 4 years. So when you are playing that safety 3-3-5 again, hybrid type linebacker almost type role, and you're as productive as Thompson was with one of the best defensive programs in football for 4 years, that says something.
Yeah, I agree completely. And the Bills do value special teams play too. So, I mean, if you can get your foot in the door through special teams, you can stay on this roster for quite a few
All
years.
right, so there's a lot of players that we went over that will be fighting to make this team. When we talk again, right around training camp, we'll find out more about how that all works out. Hopefully, everybody stays healthy by then. Before we wrap it up, though, Ryan, I mean, we did talk about the number 2 cornerback role. Was there anything else that you think is going to be important to keep an eye on before we even get to training camp?
I don't know how important it is. I do want to say I thought it was very a great job by Brendan Bean and company to bring in Mitch Trubisky as your quarterback number two. Trubisky obviously didn't pan out the way that the Bears thought when they drafted him number two overall, but he's won some games in this league. He's a capable starter. Josh Allen plays a very dangerous style of game, and even if he's knocked out for a series, because you have to look at him, bringing in a Mitch Trubisky is an improvement over a Matt Barkley. And this is no disrespect to Matt Barkley because he shined in some
He did.
opportunities with
Yeah.
Buffalo. Week 17 against Miami, he's throwing it deep with the Bills, already blowing them out and hitting Gabe Davis in stride for a touchdown. He had a big game against the Jets, I want to say in 2018. When he had the starters around him, he played pretty well at times. So, no disrespect to Barkley, but you're adding a younger, former first round pick, someone that if in the NFL, it's important to have someone that's capable that can come in if your quarterback is out for 2 to 3 games in a season, because those 2 to 3 games matter in seeding, matter in making the playoffs in general. So the fact that the Bills were not only able to get Trubisky, but to get him to sign a 1 year sweetheart deal at a very
Oh,
low
awesome.
rate speaks to their sales pitch. And hey, listen, maybe Ken Dorsey can kind of help you along a little bit in some areas where he's really helped Josh Allen. Maybe Brian Daboll's offensive scheme fits your skill set in the event that you have to get on this
And that's
field.
a good point because the one thing that we noticed about Trubisky early in his career that actually was effective was when he ran and was athletic and used his legs, and that's Josh Allen. So it really does seem like a perfect fit for Trubisky, like you said, to try and see it. Yeah, maybe because even if he does, of course, eventually, because I'm sure, look, he's not going to start there over his career. So, but this could be one of those things where, hey, all right, now maybe he'll get some good recommendations about, all right, now I know where I could go. What system that works best for me that maybe just didn't work for me in Chicago for whatever reason.
Yeah, and boost his stock for 2022 and beyond.
Does
Absolutely.
Jake Fromm now, is he in trouble making the team? Because we just talked about all the depth that the Bills have. They're going to want to, every to their 53rd man is going to be important. When you have a guy like Trubisky as your number 2, it's rare that you carry a third quarterback.
Yeah, I think there's definitely some risk involved. The Bills could try to get him on their practice squad, and the one thing that would work in their favor is no one really knows what Jake Fromm
No.
is, because last year he was their COVID quarterback, so he was pretty much away from the team. The beat reporters never really got to see much of him last year, so who knows how far along he is. So if a team's going to claim him,
You're right.
you're not going to know what you're going to get there. So that's a pretty big risk where I think there's going to be some other players that could hit the market or be available where you know that they've started in this league, spot starts here and there, and you'd probably be more comfortable with them. So I think you might be able to actually sneak him onto the practice
I
squad.
agree. All right, Ryan. So what are you going to have working on now? Because this is actually going to be like the deadest time of the year in the NFL is right after rookie camp, mini camp, and before training camp. I mean, this is the deadest time. So what do you work on at this point?
Yeah, way too early 53-man roster projections. We'll take a look at some of the players that are still out there that could be fits for the Bills, especially veterans at like cornerback, which we were talking about. We'll look at some other factors, maybe make a list of the most desirable road games for the season for the fans in terms of, where would you want to go and when. I think Thanksgiving night in New Orleans sounds pretty nice, so that might be one that the Bills fans want to hit up if you don't have too many family functions that you have to get to. So, we'll just do some more fun topics, but we will start digging into this roster as well.
Opening against
Pittsburgh.
Okay, that's a very important first week one match. And where is it?
It's in Buffalo. But, I think that's a tough game just because when they ended up getting Roethlisberger and Pittsburgh last year, I think Roethlisberger's arm was shot by that point in the season. His arm's not going to be shot in week one. Now, mind you, is it going to be throwing it deep every play? No. But his arm's going to be fresher than it was. They've obviously improved the running game with Najee Harris. They could not run the ball in Buffalo, and a lot of teams could run against Buffalo in the past few years. Pittsburgh was not one of them. Connor couldn't run. Snell couldn't run against them. So it's going to be a challenge. It's going to be more difficult than some think, but I think that it would be a very impressive win for the Bills in week one to kind of handle Pittsburgh right out of the gates.
And then finally, the fans. What's the hope? What's the realistic possibility right now?
Right now, Governor Cuomo pretty much said today it's going to be up to the stadium itself, which could then, trickle down to the local government. And locally, it's been said that fans who are fully vaccinated could come in. So, that leaves a lot of question marks about those who are not. Would they have to get COVID tests? What's going to happen there? But there's also a long time from now until September. So nothing's set in stone as of now. That was just preliminary talks. But yeah, I think the hope is to have a full stadium by September.
That'd be awesome. Like, we all can't wait. All right, sounds good. Great job as always, Ryan. Appreciate it. And again, we'll talk to you right around training camp.
All right, looking forward to it.